Uy, esto ya funciona, vale.
Good afternoon, and welcome back to the second science session for the Good Cop, Bad Cop meeting this week. My name is Jeff Smith. I am a senior fellow at the R Street Institute, and I am very pleased and excited to chair this panel with a group of scientists from around the globe to discuss a pretty touchy topic. It's, regardless of where you are on this planet. And for us today, the focus will be misconceptions associated with tobacco harm reduction. But in reality, our day-to-day world is inundated with misinformation. And what I'd like to do is as we go through the conversation today, try to debunk some of the misconceptions that are currently prevalent in the media, obviously at the World Health meeting that's currently going on concurrently, and in different locales around the globe, to help the consumers, the policymakers, lay folks better understand what the truth is behind tobacco harm reduction, the products that are available for consumers to choose instead of combustible cigarettes, and as well as touch on how do they handle critiquing information on a day-to-day basis. And so what tools and skills are useful to lay folks to better understand how to question information and then use that information to make decisions about their daily lives. So we have an hour today, so hopefully we'll cover quite a bit of ground. But what I'd like to do first is go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves. And so if you guys can say your name, your affiliation, where you're from, and just a little bit of background in terms of your general area of expertise.
Sure. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. Somebody else may be in the morning, somebody else in the evening. My name is Riccardo Polosa. I'm professor of medicine at the University of Catania, and perhaps one of the most prolific authors of tobacco harm-related papers. My background is mainly in the area of respiratory medicine as well as in smoking cessation. I was instrumental in establishing the first smoking cessation center in Sicily, where I work. Thank you.
En un verdadero intento de inclusión, el TPA, Taxpayers Protection Alliance, está conduciendo este tipo de paneles que son bilingües. Entonces, por eso es que tenemos a dos personas que hablan en español, parte de Latinoamérica, además de tener a Jeff y a Ricardo de lo que es el lado hablando en inglés. In a genuine desire from TPA to have inclusion and inclusivity when it comes to this kind of panels, especially because we're in Panama, they are hosting these events or these panels on a bilingual mode. Sorry. So we have here Diego Berrastro and Carmen Escrig. My name is Jeffrey Zamora, by the way. I'm president of ASOAPE Costa Rica, president of ARDT Iberoamerica. I'm also part of INCO as a social media director and audiovisual producer, and I'm the project leader of the Veritas study from the ECLAT, which is a spin-off of the University of Catania. We're going to have Diego introduce himself, so I'll presentar Diego.
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Diego Berrastro, soy médico cirujano, especialista en emergentología y en obesidad, soy médico argentino y portavoz de la red, ¿hola? No se escucha. Y portavoz de la red latinoamericana para reducción de daño asociado al tabaquismo, donde nos hemos juntado varios profesionales del ámbito sociosanitario para el tratamiento de todo lo que es científico, políticas de salud pública relacionadas con la reducción de daños.
Diego Berrastro, de Argentina, con una especialidad en el tratamiento de obesidad y además de portavoz de la red latinoamericana de... ¿por qué estoy hablando en español? ¿No tienes en inglés, verdad?
English.
Diego González, yeah. Diego Berrastro is from Argentina. He has a specialty in treatment of the obesity, and as well, he's the spokesperson for RELDAT, which is the Latin American network of medical professionals that are in favor of harm reduction when it comes to tobacco smoking. As well, we're going to have Carmen Escric. Carmen Escric.
Pues soy Carmen Escric, soy doctora en biología celular y genética, aparte de exfumadora, gracias a productos de reducción de daños. Llevo 10 años dedicándome a estudiar la ciencia del vapeo, presentarla ante doctores y autoridades de salud pública, intentando unificar criterios con esos doctores para que ellos mismos conozcan la ciencia y se posicionen e informen a autoridades y sociedades sobre reducción de daños por tabaquismo.
Carmen Escric, she's a doctor in cell biology and biogenetics. She has been involved in the area around 10 years, that actually she quit smoking through nicotine vaping devices. Now she's really trying to give this sort of information or this evidence to be handed out to medical professionals so they can decide if it is relevant for them and inform them about the general information that is available and evidence that is really available for this kind of devices to treat smoking prevalence and to reduce the harm.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you all for joining us today. And it's ironic that the English-speaking Jeff will speak English. The Spanish-speaking Jeff will interpret for the rest of the globe. Unfortunately, I grew up in the southern part of the United States, and so I know Southern, and that's about it. So I do appreciate the diversity on our panel and the diversity of viewpoints as well as the diversity of culture. So when thinking about today's panel, I really, there's so much information that exists in the world today, and gaining access to that information has become easier and easier simply because you open up your cell phone and you have access to really the world of information that exists on the internet and so forth and so on. As a scientist, I live in the scientific literature, and there's really two different ways to get information. And so I was trying to figure out what would be a really effective way to use our hour together today. And I have a list of the top 10 misperceptions, mistruths in the tobacco harm reduction. But we don't really have to hold to it. If there, as we go through the conversation, if there's something that kind of piques your interest that you want to add to it beyond just the topic we're talking about at the moment, feel free to do so. Because what is a prevalent misconception in the United States may be very different in other parts in regions of the world. So I just want to make sure we get good coverage so that the audience can walk away with this with the best information that's possible. So the first one on the list is we're gonna think about it from the perspective of not EVALI, not popcorn lung, but in general. Within the media and in certain organizations, they say that vaping is as dangerous as smoking. And so I'm not going to necessarily point to anyone, but would anyone like to share their thoughts on that statement and what might be more accurate?
Él está diciendo que quien quiera tocar el tema, bueno, ustedes vieron que es que el vapeo es tan igual o más dañino que el fumar, que si alguien quiere tomar la palabra.
Pues yo misma. Que el vapeo es tan dañino como fumar. Es una cosa que se ve habitualmente en titulares de todo el mundo, en España también, en mi país, es súper habitual. De hecho, varias veces el portavoz de la Plataforma Española para la Reducción de Daños por Tabaquismo, que por desgracia no está aquí, ha tenido que salir a desmentirlo y decir, es que peor que fumar no hay nada, y ellos muchas veces se encargan a eso, ¿no? Y, a ver, creo que está más que demostrado por activa, por pasiva. Se han hecho miles de cromatografías. Tú ves una cromatografía de gases, del humo del tabaco, del aerosol, del cigarrillo electrónico. Y la diferencia es tan brutal, tan abismal. ¿Qué hay en el humo del tabaco? Es una mezcla muy compleja. Afortunadamente tenemos aquí a Roberto, que mejor que él, yo creo que yo lo he explicado en varias ponencias estos días. Es una mezcla complejísima, repleta de tóxicos. Siempre repetimos la frase, 7.000 sustancias, más de 1.000 tóxicos, 70 carcinógenos versus el aerosol del cigarrillo electrónico, propilenglicol, glicerol, aromas alimentarios en una proporción mínima y nicotina a gusto del consumidor. Un concepto tan simple, un concepto tan sencillo, es imposible hacérselo ver a aquellos que están erigidos como autoridad de salud pública en nuestros países. Ellos saben perfectamente que hay una diferencia abismal entre una cosa y otra. Saben perfectamente que científicamente es una barbaridad decir que el humo y el aerosol del cigarrillo electrónico es lo mismo. Es una auténtica bestialidad. No obstante, políticamente y a nivel de marketing es lo que ellos necesitan, porque ellos necesitan una equiparación legislativa del producto. Por tanto, es el mantra principal.
She's saying that just like in any other countries, when it comes to Spanish-speaking countries, we face the same kind of deals, right? We also hear that the absurdity that this kind of products, the vapor that they emit is as harmful as smoke, when we know clearly that by analyzing vapor and smoke, you can definitely understand what are the main difference of both aerosols, right? From one, you have 7,000 constituents of the smoke, with 70 of them are cancer-causing substances. And when you analyze, it's completely different when it comes to vapor products, right? And at the end, sometimes it is easier for regulators to look a way to make equivalent one product to the other to make their job easier when it comes to regulate. But unfortunately, we know, well, actually, fortunately, we know that the products are deeply different when it comes to the toxicology profile of each one of them and what they produce.
Thank you, Carmen. Thanks, Jeff. It sounds very odd for me to say thanks, Jeff, but I'll get through this.
You're welcome, Jeff. You're welcome, Jeff.
You're welcome. Sure, absolutely.
Oh, okay. I mean, to insist on the fact that vaping is as worse as smoking in concerning health effects, particularly respiratory health effects, is not just absurd. It's criminal.
Yeah.
It is criminal. And it also so criminal because I feel ashamed of my peers in the universities all around the world. They don't quite just grasp the single concept that when you have an aerosol which has not more than 7,000 chemicals compared to an aerosol that contains only a few hundreds and at a lower concentration, you tell me, if you know the pathogenesis of a respiratory disease, where do you want to go with that information? I think with that information, the only conclusion is that it's very highly unlikely that you will develop any respiratory disease unless you live 150, 180 years. But by then, your life will be sniffed out by other diseases such as diabetes or cardiovascular disease.
It's a very lovely thought.
This is to say that it's not risk-free, so there is still some risk associated with that. The problem is why, instead of having this fight stating risk, no risk, why don't we try to quantify it? The quantification is the game. And when it comes to the quantification, there is a lot of gambling going on. Gambling going on from our American colleagues. They keep producing very poor quality in vitro and animal studies, as long as very poor quality epidemiological studies, that they are created in a way they're trying to raise the risk profile of a product that is, in real terms, not that risky. Let's assume for a second, and I'm sorry if I'm, how do you say, kidnapping
Monopolizing.
Sure. Think of aspirin for a moment. If, as a doctor, I would talk about this drug to my client, to my patient, just by stating all the risks and not mentioning any benefits, what would that happen? Would he take it? I don't think so. Yeah. He would be scared to death. All this bleeding from my stomach, all these problems with my joints. This is no good for me, no good. This is exactly what happens in the tobacco harm reduction world. There's no appreciation for the benefit, and there's a great interest for the risks. So, bottom line, how can you construct a risk-benefit ratio if the numerator is so populated and the denominator is so forgotten? Yeah. There's no way. Sure. So let's try to think about this, and let's try to be honest about the way we approach these products, and the same way pharma has approached development of drugs.
Sure. Diego, you want to say something?
Sí, quería comentar algo que por ahí el control de tabaco no está teniendo en cuenta, y mucha gente es de los detractores. Si vamos a las sustancias que podemos encontrar, como lo dijo Ricardo, estoy totalmente de acuerdo con Ricardo, hay sustancias que se encuentran en el aerosol del vapeo, pero lo que no entienden es que los médicos estamos acostumbrados a manejar el riesgo y el beneficio con las drogas que usamos. Entonces, tenemos esa capacidad, porque no crean que un quimioterápico para tratar el cáncer no tiene riesgo, no crean que un antiarrítmico no tiene riesgo, que una droga para la diabetes no tiene riesgo, todas tienen riesgo. Los médicos estamos evaluando ese riesgo constantemente para el beneficio de nuestros pacientes. Y otra cosa, hoy, gracias a Dios, vivimos en esta era donde no necesitamos esperar 200 años para saber si un producto es tóxico. Hoy tenemos todas las herramientas tecnológicas para saberlo de inmediato en qué dosis ese producto va a inferir daño a futuro. Entonces, eso es lo que tenemos que utilizar como científicos, como médicos, y ya no digo para ocuparme de regulaciones, todo. Nosotros tendríamos que estar hablando de cómo implementar planes para asistir a nuestros pacientes con estas herramientas.
What he's saying is that when it comes to medical professionals, they are used to handle things on a benefit and risk proportionate evaluation. That's why, for example, on any area of medication used to treat cancer, used to treat diabetes, there's always a benefit and a risk. And the medical professional and scientists are used to handle that risk carefully and actually make a recommendation based on that risk. As well, he says that we should not be speaking about those topics. We should be speaking about how to develop programs that actually treat the patient already and their needs.
And perhaps we need also to think of programs that will improve the level of knowledge of our peers. Because if our doctors do not understand vaping, if our doctors do not understand nicotine, how can they counsel smokers in their trajectory out of tobacco smoking? You tell me. Yeah. I mean, there's been ample evidence that the vast majority of doctors globally do not understand nicotine. They think nicotine can cause cancer. They think nicotine can cause cardiovascular disease. they think nicotine can cause chronic respiratory obstructive diseases. That is nonsense. And I think it is just about time we really need to think not just to educate politicians, we just not to need to educate our peers, but we need to educate lay people and doctors and healthcare practitioners.
The new generations of doctors. Yeah.
The new generation
Las
of
nuevas
doctors.
generaciones de
That's
doctores.
so very important because if my mind is full of misinformation about nicotine and I still believe nicotine can cause some damage to my patient here, well, what kind of interaction, professional interaction I'm going to have with him? Completely distorted and biased,
Right.
I must say.
Yo quería decir algo. Ricardo tiene toda la razón. Tiene toda la razón. Pero cuando lo que te encuentras es que la gran mayoría de doctores llevan 20 años bombardeados con información sobre que la nicotina es una de las peores drogas existentes, que si tocas una gota te va a matar. Básicamente los doctores han estado sometidos a la misma desinformación durante 20 años de control del tabaco a la que ha estado la sociedad de todo el mundo. Titulares de prensa demonizando la nicotina como si fuera peor que la heroína. ¿Qué ocurre? Que es algo que está tan instaurado en el subconsciente colectivo que cambiarlo es extremadamente difícil. Y más aún cuando si intentas cambiarlo se te castiga, se te ningunea, se te señala con el dedo o incluso te arriesgas a perder tu puesto de trabajo.
She's saying that the problem is that, well, one of the problems, and that she completely agrees with what Ricardo said, is that doctors are susceptible to the same type of misinformation from media headlines about this topic. So, and they have been bombarded with 20, 30 years of this nonsense about the nicotine hazard to even touch it, right? That with one single drop, you can be dead. So that's the problem that the misinformation is causing not only to patients, but to the doctors and how they can actually get that information sorted out.
One thing that I like to do is encourage consumers, again, critical evaluation of the information is key. If you go to the U.S.'s CDC webpage, it clearly states that vapes may contain formaldehyde, diacetyls, heavy metals, and other potential carcinogens. Now, when you read that on, one of the globe's leading health organizations' webpage, you may not put much emphasis on the word may. And to say that they're outright lying is not true. Because if you have an open system and you have a dry wick and you have a powerful battery,
You will not pay.
so if you're misusing the product or not using it as designed, yes, you can be exposed to potentially harmful chemicals. But that is not, that's the less than 0.1%, not the 99.9% of vaping devices that exist. So the misinformation is not just in what they're writing about the product, it's how they're writing about the product. And so for the consumer, for parents, for policymakers, you really need to ask the questions of what does that word may actually represent and be able to look for clarity and the truth in that aspect as well. Again, my list of 10, we've managed to maybe hit one, but we've hit a couple of the others along the way. The second one is I think, again, a very controversial topic for people that sit in this room, and that is that there's no evidence that the use of reduced risk products actually reduce smoking. And what they'll cite are studies where individuals that use reduced risk products also still continue to smoke. And that there's not clinical studies that exist that show that these particular products are as efficient of a way of quitting smoking as compared to counseling, using pharmaceutical interventions, or wearing a nicotine patch or using nicotine gum. And I'm just going to open it up to the entire panel once again. If you want to go ahead and make any kind of clarifying statements around that.
I think Ricardo or Diego.
Okay, my turn again. It's going to be easy.
First the past.
Okay, let's start from the second question. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, second question is denial. It's about denial of efficacy or effectiveness of electronic cigarettes in aiding smokers to quit smoking, right? I mean, I don't have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that we have plenty of evidence that electronic cigarettes are effective and are as effective as the best smoking, anti-smoking medication products in randomized controlled trials. And the Cochrane has repeatedly, from 2014 until quite recently, a month ago, the same message over and over again. And the message is clear. Electronic cigarettes can help people quit smoking, full stop. So I'm quite kind of puzzled that we are discussing something that, in my opinion, is so super clear. So this is not even a myth, in my opinion. But on top of that, if you triangulate the fancy Cochrane reviews and randomized controlled trials with population studies or observational studies or anecdotal experience from my patients, the people that attend my smoking cessation clinic and the people that I encounter every day in the street, at the supermarket, there is super clear evidence for me that this is the way to help smokers get away from smoking, okay? And let me finish with accidental quitting. When I first launched, more than 10 years ago, the first randomized controlled trials on electronic cigarette that we called ECLAT at that time. I mean, quit rates were not extraordinary at that time. You know, the quit rate for the group that was using electronic cigarette was ranging between 8 and 10%. However, we need to recognize that these people were not interested in quitting. They were just curious. They just knocked on the back of the smoking cessation center's door, just curious to try, because we put up an advert in the local newspaper. And they wanted to try this new gizmo, this new gadget, this new technology. And at that time, it was not very much evolved. You can think, at that time, we were using a 2009 three-piece atomizer, you know, something very, very basic. However, bottom line is that 10% of these 300 people quit smoking for good at 52 weeks, which is quite a long time, and 75% of these people even quit electronic cigarettes. So it is interesting to know that people who were not even intending, not even dreaming of quitting smoking, end up quitting smoking and quitting vaping. This very early data is being replicated very recently by very elegant studies, one by Matthew Carpenter, and it's just proving exactly the same point, that people who are not interested in quitting and trying electronic cigarette may eventually quit, even if that was not their intention. And let me tell you, if this is so true, because it is true, I mean, what is going to be the health economics impact of such an approach? I would say enormous. I would talk to politicians that I find a gizmo, an approach, and a strategy that doesn't cost them a penny, and yet you will have a lot of people quitting even if they don't want to. So this is an area that we need to, I think, discuss and promote, and we need to let people know that this is an important aspect, and it goes completely beyond the simplistic idea of an electronic cigarette used as medicinal products.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I have... Sorry. Perdón, en español. Está intentando buscarlo esta misma mañana, no hará ni 3 horas, titular en uno de los periódicos más importantes de mi país: vapear no ayuda a dejar de fumar. Es un titular que se repite periódicamente aproximadamente una vez cada 2 semanas. De igual manera, tú entras en las redes sociales, ves a los doctores tuitean ese tipo de artículos, tú intentas acercarte a ellos, los usuarios intentan acercarse a ellos, les hablan de la Cochrane. Respuesta: la Cochrane está pagada por las tabaqueras. Ok. Al final llega un momento, es una idea que se ha ido, gracias a Jeff además, que se ha ido gestando mucho estos días. Llega un momento en que te planteas decir, ¿hasta cuándo tenemos que perder vida y tiempo en intentar convencer a gente que nunca va a ser convencida? Dejo la pregunta en el aire.
She's saying that like every 2 weeks, if you look into headlines when it comes to newspapers in Spain, you find that there's a constant message or constant headlines that appears. That is, nicotine vaping does not help people to quit smoking. Right? Even though that consumers and medical professionals have tried to approach this news, and especially the doctors that are actually tweeting about these articles, they're reluctant and they don't care actually to correct that. So she's saying that for how long are we gonna be trying to correct or change the mind of the people that are never gonna be convinced about this, even though that there's Cochrane and there's so much evidence about it?
También con las noticias, nuestras noticias médicas salen en revistas médicas, en sitios médicos. Estas noticias en contra salen en todos los medios. Esa es la diferencia. Las personas comunes no van a ir a leer papers médicos. Somos nosotros los médicos los que tenemos que informar a nuestra población de pacientes y al resto de la comunidad, pero muchas veces no tenemos acceso a esos medios masivos de comunicación. Entonces ahí corremos con un peso muy difícil de llevar adelante. Y una fake news se instala en segundos. Ahora, la verdad tarda años en salir a la luz para rebatir una fake news.
He's saying that when it comes to doctors are the ones that are supposed to read that actually they read the journals, the medical journals, and most of the common public do not care about reading those stories or reading those papers, I'm sorry. And that, but they get the headlines, and to correct those fake news, it takes years and years to actually combat that misinformation that is propagated within just seconds.
We tend to forget one important element in this discussion, which is the consumer, the smoker itself. And that is the pinky, the rosy story that I'm going to tell you. My impression is that smokers or former smokers or consumers got a better understanding of the products than many of the doctors in our professions.
Absolutely.
And they actually have been inspiring me when I design studies. You know, one day I met somebody at the barber shop, and she showed me I'm not going to say the brand, okay? But I asked, how do you feel with this product? Did you quit smoking? She said, yes. I can do more stairs. And why you think it works for you? Because it contains less tar. So for them, the idea of tar, which has been perpetrated by the media for decades in our mainstream media, showing tar
Black
lungs,
lungs.
you know, full of this sticky, blacky thing,
Claro.
you know, it's been so embedded in their minds that they counteract that image just by saying this doesn't contain any tar. So that's the reason why I feel better. And this is a lesson for us to learn. We need to learn more from people than from scientific papers, because scientific papers are, let me use a very elegant word, piloted somehow by referee, by editors, by the message they want to put out there. And I know for sure how difficult it's been and is for me to publish in a high impact factor journal compared to many of my peers that have published really poor quality science in very high impact factor journals. The only difference being they produce what they really want to hear. I publish, produce, and study something they don't want to hear. That's the big difference.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point. When it comes to really impacting and clearing the air on these myths and outright lies, you know, scientists hold a responsibility to know all of the science, not just part of the science. And those individuals that tend to propagate messages like the ones we're talking about today only kind of live in their small pool of the science instead of understanding the breadth and the depth of the literature as a whole. Now, as a scientist, that's our job, the good scientist, to actually live in the literature and know everything, the good stuff and the crap, excuse my language, but for lay folks it's really difficult to do. And so I think it's really important for consumers and people who have gone through this experience to share it with their physicians, to share it with their family and friends, and even though it might be, you know, N of one, single person type of stories, over the millions and millions of people across the globe that will be sharing these stories, it really becomes a very powerful voice and a way to impact change in terms of these perceptions the misperceptions that we're talking about today. So we spoke about nicotine a little bit, but in terms of a specific misperception, is that the existence of these reduced risk products, non-combustible nicotine delivery systems, are not really there to help people. They're just another way to get another generation addicted to nicotine. And if you are addicted to nicotine, that is just as bad as being addicted to smoking. And so one of the things I tell my friends, families, colleagues, students is to ask the question, what does it mean to be addicted to nicotine? So if I'm going to be addicted to nicotine using snus, what does that actually mean in terms of health risks, health costs, over the short term, over the long term, and kind of compare that to the short-term, long-term health cost associated with nicotine through a combustible product.
Jeff, ¿puedes traducir?
Eso es que le estaba preguntando que, digamos, cuál es el perfil de riesgo de la nicotina ajena del cigarro, digamos, a corto y mediano plazo, en comparación con el perfil de riesgo del continuar fumando a largo plazo. O sea, la comparativa.
Ok. El perfil de riesgo de la nicotina separada de... Hemos estado hablando ya de eso, ¿no? Bueno. Pero estaba hablando de niños hace un momento.
Sí.
Ok. Vale. Estabas planteando, claro, el tema de producir toda una generación de niños adictos a la nicotina. Es uno de sus principales. Claro, antes ellos utilizaban la puerta de entrada al tabaquismo. Como la puerta de entrada al tabaquismo se cae por su propio peso, porque si eso ocurriera estarían aumentando las tasas de tabaquismo, no ocurre, se han pasado a crear toda una generación de adictos a la nicotina. Bien, seguimos con las estadísticas de los países que tienen producto regulado, por ejemplo Reino Unido, en lo cual se ve que la gran mayoría de personas que utilizan estos dispositivos son personas adultas, exfumadoras, y efectivamente hay una pequeña proporción de menores de edad que utilizan estos productos, pero incluso con toda la parafernalia y todos los mensajes que se han lanzado ahora con los desechables, que Reino Unido ha llegado a prohibir los desechables, incluso así, ves el uso de estos productos por menores de edad y ves el uso del tabaco por menores de edad y no hay color. Y la pregunta que hay que hacerse es, bien, yo tengo una pequeña proporción de menores de edad que están vapeando. ¿Cuántos de ellos eran fumadores antes? ¿Y cuántos de los que no eran fumadores estarían fumando si no estuvieran vapeando? Esa es la pregunta clave que ninguna autoridad de salud pública se está haciendo. Hay que elegir. Tienes una pequeña proporción de menores, de los cuales la mayoría son fumadores, y están reduciendo el daño, les guste o no les guste. Tienes eso y tienes que contraponer eso a la cantidad de millones de vidas adultas que se están salvando gracias al vapeo. ¿Por qué la vida de esos niños o el consumo de nicotina de esos niños vale más que la de los adultos? Voy a poner un ejemplo. En España es común que un padre entre a una tienda de vapeo. En España, recuerdo, está prohibida tanto la venta como la entrega a menores de edad. Es decir, un padre legalmente no le puede dar un cigarrillo electrónico a su hijo. Ocurre habitualmente que un padre entra en una tienda de vapeo, vengo a comprar un cigarrillo electrónico para mi crío de 15 años porque está fumando y quiero que deje de fumar. ¿Qué hacemos ahí? ¿Qué hacemos? Ahí lo dejo.
She's saying that the gateway theory is falling by its own weight, as we see the statistics from all around the world, that actually the prevalence is going down when it comes to that subset of youth, right? That actually is falling, is actually smoking less and less and less. And that, for example, in Spain, where it is forbidden to actually provide an e-cigarette to a minor, right? Some of the parents that, even if the government or us don't like it, the parents are providing an e-cigarette because the kids, some of them, actually already smoking. That we like it or not, it's harm reduction, right? That's what she says. So what should we do then if denied a harm reduction tool to them, or providing with information so they can make a choice?
Las estadísticas no avalan el concepto de puente del vapeo juvenil o infantil al tabaquismo. Es cierto, hay más y habría que definir, ¿no? Porque hablamos de los jóvenes. ¿Jóvenes de qué edad? Porque llaman jóvenes a personas de 18 años y en muchos países...
De 25.
O de 25, y en muchos países ya son adultos, ya votan y ya son penalmente responsables. No estamos hablando de niños de 10 años. Entonces, habría que definir esa franja etaria cuando nos referimos a los jóvenes están vapeando. Y así y todo, si existiese una epidemia de vapeo juvenil y fuera una puerta de entrada al tabaquismo, deberíamos tener el correlato estadístico de que aumentó el tabaquismo en esa franja etaria, y eso no se vio y no ocurre, al contrario, sigue bajando. Entonces, creo que es una discusión que tenemos que dar desde el lado científico, desde el lado de políticas. ¿Qué vamos a hacer para que las personas de poca edad, y vamos a ponerlo así, no fumen, no vapeen si no es necesario? Ahora, ¿qué vamos a hacer con los que tienen la necesidad de hacerlo? Porque previamente eran fumadores. Entonces, es un debate que tenemos que dar, ¿no? Entonces, es importantísimo que tengamos la visión sobre esos es el futuro. Y si hay un niño, un menor de edad que vapea, hay atrás un adulto irresponsable.
He's saying that one of the biggest problems is when it comes to the analysis of the people that vape is that usually they're using the youth bracket from to ending at 18 or 25 years old, right? So it doesn't make sense. So it's actually focusing on the idea that the gateway theory, if it was happening, it will actually skyrocket already the number of people smoking, in which there's no evidence. He says that behind every kid that have tried vaping is an irresponsible father. So we should be focusing a lot on parenting, good parenting.
I'm not going to tell you anything new when I say that many organizations weaponize children for their own purposes.
Yeah.
Look at the charities. They put on the television these poor kids starving, and they look for money. That's the reality. Why am I saying this? Because weaponizing kids has been a tactic, not a recent one. It's been a tactic a long time ago. What really shocks me is that this tactic was not used to the full extent for kids smoking. Where were the lady against vaping when the smoking was so highly prevalent? That's my question. This epidemics of vaping is also a product of overinflation of statistics. Why? Because if my definition of vaping is ever used a product or use over the last 30 days, and for a minute, try to think as a kid at school with their peers, going to parties. The new normal is vaping, is not smoking. And that explains why tobacco smoking is being eradicated amongst young people. Because it's not cool anymore. It's not cool anymore.
Yeah.
So you will see that this is the tobacco endgame, thanks to vaping, probably, I am sorry to say, thanks to disposable that made great gains in that particular area. But we really, I think it's important to track and report what's happening in our society. So we really need to use better metrics of e-cigarette use because we want to see what is happening, okay? At the same time, please don't forget that electronic cigarettes are substitutes. So they're substituting a much dangerous product, which is tobacco combustible. And quite frankly, I see this as a big positive story, a big victory for public health, rather than we advocate for electronic cigarettes being condemned for talking too much about vaping and so promoting vaping amongst young people. We don't promote anything. Young people, as somebody said, they can have sex at the age of 16, they can put up a family, they can drive a car, they can drink alcoholics, they have responsibilities. I cannot see any reason why they can choose in between tobacco smoking and vaping. Actually, are more clever than us 50 years ago when we had no other choice but to smoke tobacco combustibles, but now they are clever. They identify that the problem is smoking, and probably they are, turning towards a product that is less harmful, more catchy. It doesn't cause bad breath, so you can kiss your girlfriend. Nobody's gonna complain. There are a number of advantages, of course, but to me, the most important advantage is from a public health perspective. Vaping will eradicate tobacco smoking in this age range, and this is going to be forever. There's no turning back.
I want to say one.
You don't need a microphone.
Okay. Una única frase. La única empresa que he visto promocionar imágenes de niños vapeando es la Organización Mundial de la Salud.
The only institution that I have seen
No,
promoting
institución no, empresa.
the only company that I have seen that uses kids vaping on their ads is the WHO.
Y por otro lado, moralmente para muchos es difícil de aceptar que las nuevas generaciones comprendieron el concepto de reducción de daños y por eso están vapeando.
Están reduciendo el daño.
Y están reduciendo el daño generacionalmente. Por una cuestión de que son más afines a las nuevas tecnologías, ellos mismos decidieron ese rumbo, no se los impuso nadie.
He's saying that the new age bracket, the youth, actually are embracing harm reduction and got to know harm reduction a lot better than, older folks, let's say.
Much more elegant than what I was going to say. I was going to say, the principles of tobacco harm reduction does not have an age limit. It doesn't really matter what it is, it's harm reduction. And to think about youth as being excluded from the opportunity to benefit from harm reduction is immoral perspective for physicians, adults, whomever, who are trying to make decisions about these kids' lives, in my opinion. So we've covered a lot of ground today. The next topic is really, you can look at it from a couple of different perspectives. And for me, I have a paper coming out shortly that's going to go into this a bit more depth. Shameless plug. But flavor isn't important. There are studies that have now recently suggested that the only type of product that needs to be available in terms of a reduced risk product should be either tobacco flavored, which is a flavor, or menthol mint, right? And the primary driver behind that is that flavor might attract people, lots of people,
Obviously.
kids. It might attract kids to trying these products out. So what do you thought in terms of importance of flavor in these products and how that might impact the conversations that we're having today?
I'll be very quick. Flavors attract anybody, not just kids. And I think without the choice that you can have with differential flavors, the whole magic of electronic cigarette as an aid to quit smoking or to stay away from tobacco smoking will dissipate. So to me, it's no brainer. Flavorings are very important. The tobacco controllers know this very well, and they want to jeopardize the whole efficacy of electronic cigarette by restricting flavors. It's very simple.
Bueno, vamos a ser todos breves. Es importantísimo, porque si no todos tomaríamos helado únicamente de vainilla o comeríamos pizza solo de margarita. E inclusive la Big Pharma pone sabores a los medicamentos, inclusive para adultos e inclusive para pediátricos. ¿Por qué es eso? Porque va a tomar más fidelidad hacia el medicamento o el método. Es importantísimo, y más cuando en el fumador se empiezan a limpiar y a reactivar esas nuevas papilas gustativas y olfativas, nunca más quiere sabor a tabaco. Si yo lo obligo a que siga consumiendo tabaco, estoy haciendo muy mal las cosas.
He says that people like, all people like flavors. And, other way, we're only going to be using vanilla ice cream and having one flavor of pizza, right? One topic. He says that even Big Pharma uses flavors to get fidelity with the medications with adults and youngsters, right? So flavor obviously play an integral part of the whole equation of health.
Let me just remind you of this nice paper that came out in October last year evaluating the impact of flavoring in initiation of quitting. That was published in the Harm Reduction Journal, and it's data of over 29,000 US adults, and we're talking adults. Look, the tobacco flavor was important in the process of quitting smoking in less than 15% of the respondents, whereas the fruity flavors, cookie, and other types were consistently more important for helping people quitting smoking by up to 80%. Adults, that's what I'm talking about.
And the way that paper was summarized was that since there was no real significant difference between mint flavor and the other flavors, then we don't need the other flavors. So again, it really does take a little work to really go into the data to the point where people can understand what the truth is. You know, from a flavor perspective, it's evolutionary, it's genetic, it's sociological, it's the society you were raised in. There are so many factors that impact why someone will choose to use one product or another product based on a flavor characteristic. It is extraordinarily powerful in the fight against smoking and getting people into more healthy lifestyles. But again, we will have more time to talk about that hopefully later on. So we did start a few minutes late, so I'm going to steal 5 minutes to finish up here. For the consumers out watching us on YouTube today, and they're confused, and they don't know where to go to find good information. Are there any examples that you might suggest as to where they can go to get more information to help them better understand the information they're hearing and the questions that are generated from those? Any suggestions?
Referencias de dónde pueden encontrar los consumidores información acerca de esto, porque pueden estar dudosos o no saber dónde buscar.
When I want to go and buy the best dinner, what do? I just go for a friend or for other people that are knowledgeable of the restaurants in the area, and then ask for advice, which one's the best? And they will point me to the best choice. My suggestion to the people on YouTube that are listening to us is just go and talk to another vapor. Another person who has a wealth of experience that not even me nor any doctor has. Because I understand it's a very personal experience, but having an honest chat with somebody who successfully quit smoking by switching to a combustion-free product is priceless. That's a priceless experience, and that's the way to go. Another message I would like to send to your people in this YouTube channel is don't forget that harm reduction saves lives. To you.
Well, again, I guess we'll end on that wonderful word. Again, I'd like to thank the audience. We have another science session tomorrow and multiple sessions throughout the day. So keep your eye on the YouTube page, and lots of really interesting conversations to come. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the latest session. This is all about how to debunk misinformation to shape meaningful policies. I'm Christopher Snowden from the Institute of Economic Affairs in England. I am very pleased to be joined here by Jeannie Cameron from the UK, from Pablo O'Donnell from Argentina, and Adam Hoffer from the USA. You need no reminding, I dare say, that this area of policy is awash with misinformation, and perhaps unusually, ignorance is increasing and public understanding is going backwards, pretty much around the world. And all the surveys I've seen have shown in Britain, America, Australia, you name it, that people have become less informed about the relative risks of vaping and smoking in particular. In the last 10 years, that essentially when people didn't know very much at all about e-cigarettes, they were better informed than they are when they think they know more. Things like popcorn lung have been, incredibly persistent zombie claim, despite the fact that there's never been a case of popcorn lung amongst a vapor, and it's almost impossible that there would be one unless they worked in a popcorn factory. It is probably the most pernicious of the myths that go around Facebook and other social media and just down the pub. EVALI, of course, the EVALI epidemic in America, 2019, which was very quickly shown to be the result of black market THC vapes that themselves have been adulterated. The authorities in America were very slow to make that clear, and in fact seemed to relish the confusion that people had with regards to assuming that there was something to do with nicotine vapes, and many, many, many more besides. On a regular basis, you see ludicrous claims appearing in the media, and as someone was saying in one of the earlier sessions, even amongst doctors, in fact especially amongst doctors, the belief that nicotine is itself harmful, causes lung cancer or what have you, is believed by the majority of them. So it's hardly surprising that the general public tend to believe these things as well. So the question here we're asked to address is how to debunk this, so we can have better policies. We in Britain are staring down a barrel of a ban on disposable vapes, and this is said to be popular with about 70% or more of the population. So in a sense, there's a democratic mandate for this. However, less than 30% of the population understand that vapes are much safer than cigarettes. So you have to wonder how much you should be taking public opinion into account when public opinion is based on misunderstandings and misinformation. Who would like to go first on this question? I'll go across the table. Pablo, do you want to start us off?
Oh, okay. So, well, yes, misinformation can shape policy. That's the main problem with misinformation. And one thing is, when you talk to decision makers, is the cause of the misinformation. For instance, let's take climate change and nuclear energy. There is a huge debate on either if nuclear energy is useful for reducing the CO2 emissions. Now, there is no scientific debate on that. It's very clear, the evidence that nuclear energy helps reduce CO2 emissions, but there is fear on nuclear energy. So some countries have taken policies, for instance, Germany, when there was the Fukushima incident, and the policy was taken by fear, not by scientific information. So one of the key should be take the fear away from the debate. So talk to the other part, to the other side, and say, okay, why do you fear? Do you fear, in the case of nuclear energy, do you feel a meltdown? Do you fear there's going to be like a radiation? What is the fear that you don't allow us to advance with this agenda? So addressing the fears of the other side that you are eventually going to need to pass bill is one of the ways to address misinformation. Another case was with the GMOs, genetically modified organisms. I think in Europe they were banned, and the science was pretty clear that GMOs were okay. They produced more crop, but there was fear. In this case, the fear can be somehow understood. It was something new, a new challenge. So people react in fear to what we don't know, And all of us has these biases and these instincts. So lowering the level of fear, it's, I think, an important thing to do in order to stop misinformation and be able to talk to the other side.
Thank you. Jeannie?
Oh, yes, is this, yes, I've got one on. Yes, I think one of the biggest problems is, in terms of debunking the myths, is an organised campaign against the opposition. I think there are many very, very good and well thought through mini campaigns all over the place. In the UK, you have the UK Vape Industry Association, which fights things. In different parts of the world, you have different things. But when you're in a war in this sort of situation against, as we were talking about this morning, the pharmaceutical industry combined with WHO, combined with international NGOs, with massive funding against. And I see continually, as I have over 20 or so years, with tobacco first and smoking, and then with vaping, the vaping industry, is that it's not a fully organised on one message ability campaign to fight that problem. I'll give you an example. In the UK, I find, for example, in the UK Vape Industry Association, you've got everyone supposed to be behind vaping, and yet you have some of them who are, well, we actually don't make disposables or sell those, so we're not going to really support them. We're supporting pod systems, or we're supporting this particular system. And then you end up with very mixed messages. You end up with not a clear message to the UK government that is a particularly strong one. Whereas the other side has had and well said, structured campaign, which was to address the environmental issues and to address the youth issues everywhere around the world, in every single media or every single talk that goes on in every part of it. It's always on that very clear message. And if we're going to debunk that from the other side, we need to have a very clear message. I think that is probably what I would say is one of the biggest problems. And that's probably why a clear message isn't getting through to the decision makers, in my view.
Thank you. And Adam?
Debunking myths is extraordinarily difficult. I would say if your goal is to debunk the myths that are out there, I think the first thing that would serve us very well as the ones who are presumably preaching the truth here is that we need to analyze our audience. And when I look at this, I see multiple battlegrounds and multiple different audiences with whom we need to engage. I break this up in my head into 3 different categories. So I come from the academic world. I publish in peer-reviewed academic journals. I interact with a lot of scientists, and I think that world is its own world. The battleground is done with scientific facts and publishing. And it is a completely separate world than, well, really the real world. As someone who spent a decade in academia, I can tell you that the way in which academics interact and the publishing process is just different than how we interact in the real world. And I think that what we see is that there are some scientists, right, some medical professionals who truly believe that nicotine is the problem. And for that audience, I think that the answer to debunking the myths is more on the research front and getting research in front of them and engaging directly with those individuals and scientists. I want to separate that world from sort of the other 2 sectors, the way in which we can affect policy here, and that is in a political world and then in what I think of as the general public. Right? So I think that if we're going to engage with those audiences, the messaging to all 3 of those groups, scientists, politicians, and then the general public, needs to be different. The general public, I don't think they're going to understand p-squareds and r-squared values and all these different scientific facts. And so I think the messaging there is the way to engage with them is through storytelling. I've heard a lot of fantastic stories at this conference from other panelists and by just engaging with people here at the conference. I'd love to see those stories more in the real world. A lot of people here do some fantastic work. Comparing to other arenas, I've heard multiple people tell me that the biggest advent for school choice in the United States was a documentary, Waiting for Superman, because it took this idea, these complex academic ideas that had been researched, and they boiled them down to families and individual people, and people could connect and relate with that. And then the stories and the data and the science and everything else behind that made more sense. And so people became more on board with the school choice movement. That movement is not over, it's very much still a battleground, but the telling of stories is the way in which we connect with the general public. And then the way in which we engage with politicians, well, I don't know if there's an easy answer there. But I will say that engaging with politicians, I like to come at it with both the scientists and the public support on board, because politicians, well, they serve their own best interests, and that generally involves listening to their constituents and sometimes scientists, if it suits what they're looking to do. But I think the messaging to all three of those groups needs to be different, and we have an opportunity to engage with all of them in different ways. And so, as someone who works for an educational organization, this is something that we try to work on mainly through tax policy, but trying to come up with different products for those different groups.
Yeah, thanks. If I can just follow up on that, because you bring the scientists into it quite rightly. And, of course, it's much more powerful to have a debunking from a scientist rather than somebody who works for a think tank. And quite naturally, people will tend to appeal to authority. And if you've got a doctor, however badly informed, they're likely to be more persuasive just by virtue of being a doctor than someone like myself. And, of course, there are plenty of scientists who are familiar with the real facts of this, but they tend not to be activist scientists. You've got activist scientists like someone like Stanton Glantz, who's extremely prolific, very keen to be on the television and promote his research, whereas I tend to find in various different policy areas that very often you can have a majority of scientists who go against the prevailing media narrative, but they are shy, they are busy with their own work, they don't want to ruffle any feathers, and very often they simply don't know how to get their voice out there. In Britain recently, there's been a bit of a scare over so-called ultra-processed foods. Now, most people who work in nutrition know that this is, at the very least, exaggerated. And I was trying to encourage some of them to, write an article for somebody and put forward the other point of view. And, they said, well, how do you do that? Well, you just write an article and submit it. Just get in touch with a magazine and say, I'm a scientist, I'd like to say this. And I helped him out in the end, and it got published. But for various reasons, scientists are not always able to go out there and take on these other people. In a sense, we need to mobilize them. Any thoughts on how we can help do that?
I mean, it is difficult, and you make a great point. I should say that spending a decade in academia, your point is very well made there, that there are no incentives, generally speaking, for any academics to do work that is policy advocacy or writing op-eds, engaging with the general public. The currency in academia is peer-reviewed journal publications, sometimes grant applications and money that way, but that is their currency, and things outside of that realm often are not incentivized and then just not rewarded or done. I think that one potential way to mobilize academics is to, you need a special breed of academic. You need someone in that space willing to spearhead some of this work. And then it's, you're not going to get every academic out there writing op-eds and engaging on policy, but if you can find someone who is well-versed and willing to do it, I think that they may be able to bring along, even if it's just signatures of other academics in the field for a policy concern or something promoting policy. I think that you can find that you can try to at least put a perception out there that there is academic support for a particular issue. As an economist, this is something that has bugged me for my entire career. People constantly think that economists are completely divided, can't agree on anything, when in reality you find that for most policy issues, 90 to 95% of the field agree on the topic. But when you start interacting with the political realm, they will look for somebody that agrees with what they want. So they'll pick someone from the extreme minority if they can find them. Look through policy proposals from politicians, and you'll find that they can come up with some academic to support their ideas, no matter how outlandish they seem. And so I think that mobilizing academics is extraordinarily difficult because they're often not rewarded to do any of this. But if you can find somebody who is interested, then you can try to support an individual or a group of individuals, and they can bring some people along.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's probably a sense of exhaustion about it, because it does get very repetitive, having to debunk the same thing again and again and again. If you take an example from economics, nearly every economist would agree that rent control is a very bad idea, but they keep popping up because politicians keep thinking they're a good idea. And you can imagine an economist would write the odd article, but they're not going to keep writing the same article again year after year, because as far as they're concerned, it's a dead letter. It's done and dusted. So either you need to keep finding fresh faces, or you need to find real incentives for somebody to carry on
Well,
repeating
that's
themselves.
where I think, to go back to a proper strategic campaign on a global level that, you know, you really organised, that has the academics, the scientists, different parts of the science. You have all the various segments, and you have the, you know, one high level message, whatever it is. So with the WHO, as I was saying, and the others, they choose youth, and they chose environment. So they've got environmental scientists talking on that. They've got young kids and people that they get in to say, oh, look, I was picking up all these disposable vapes, you know, outside the school. All the different elements, all organised in. I mean, when I used to work in the Australian government, we had a thing called Animals, and it was called the National Media Liaison Service. And what it did, its job was just to do that across all issues, to really sort of find and really run campaigns that were big. I mean, we can see the other side doing it. I think, you know, there's a lot of very, very good work, but it's not organised behind some very clear messages, which is where, I mean, I'm not being critical. The messages are, everyone's doing the right thing, but it's not as organised as perhaps the other side is. And, you know, even when it comes to actually nicotine itself, you'll have the scientists who will really understand that, but then you have the people who have to talk to the policy people. Do they understand that? I've come across, I'm not a scientist, I'm more in the policy area, but I often find some of the basic things that you have to explain, the difference between nicotine emissions from a cigarette and the delivery of that to the bloodstream, compared with 20 milligrams per milliliter, for example, in the content. One is measured on an external emission after in the smoke. One is measured in a bottle before it gets in. But in terms of equivalence in the bloodstream of what the person is getting in terms of nicotine delivery to them, they're completely very different levels. And yet a politician sees, 59 milligrams per milliliter of nicotine in content in a 5% Juul, for example, and you see a 1 milligram cigarette, and they kind of see 1 and they see 59, and they say, oh, that's too high. And you go, actually, 59 milligrams per milliliter of nicotine content is actually near to not even half of a 1 milligram cigarette in terms of the bloodstream nicotine, things like that. There's so much we could do, the scientists could do, to sort of really make those messages much clearer to policymakers to understand those things, so they don't make just knee-jerk reactions, as we see and have seen in the UK recently.
Yeah, but even that example you give is actually quite complicated. It takes a bit of explaining, doesn't it? Whereas they will just go, well, there's 3 packs of cigarettes and a Juul. You know?
Yeah.
People can get their head around that. So it just illustrates really how difficult it is to
So
take
essentially, from a policy perspective, you could basically say that any vape, pretty much, is going to be less than a 1 milligram cigarette in terms of delivery to the bloodstream, as far as I understand, as a non-scientist. And you just get that little message out. It's a simple message, but it just means, no, you don't have to have all these discussions about whether this nicotine content in the vape or this, you know, which is better, 60, 59, 20, which one should we follow? Anything is pretty much, even at the higher levels, is going to be less than a 1 milligram cigarette, which is regulated in Europe and other parts of the world. They're just simple little things that we could use to break down myths. If we could get these messages clearer from the science side to the people who are the ones usually talking and explaining to policymakers these concepts.
Yeah, also you can avoid the debate, like consumer choice. Okay, so there is no scientific debate there. So you can address the politicians, talk about like consumer choice and legalization on that ground. The academic and scientific debate can be taken much later. So that's another way to avoid these problems when you talk to decision makers. So you avoid to explain a lot of technicalities. So it's a moral position, not a scientific position on the issue. That's a way you are not solving misinformation in this case, but you are avoiding the problem. That would be and the result is the same. So you
But if
get legalization.
policymakers are systematically misinformed about the risks, then that's bound to have an effect on their moral judgment as well, right? I mean, if you really believe that disposable vapes were more dangerous than cigarettes, then even someone who very much believes in personal liberty might think, well, we could probably do without those, you know?
Not necessarily, because you don't value maybe things. I mean, if you like to jump from a plane with a parachute, it's something that you value, disregarding if it is more and less dangerous than, I don't know, cave diving or whatever. You like this because that's it. That's it. So avoiding I mean, maybe it's true. Maybe some sort of evaluation based on risk can also be addressed and impact on your values. But the key issue is avoid as much technicality as possible, and maybe let's debate that later. So if the moral position can solve the scientific issue and allow it to be taken much later, and you pass the bill, that is the final goal, I think that's a way to go. So in this case, it would not solve misinformation, but it will avoid the problem with bypass it.
I mean,
yes.
I do agree with you that the basic personal liberty argument needs to be made much more often, and we can accept that things have risks, but people are allowed to take risks. Unfortunately, of course, lots of politicians don't agree with us on the libertarian argument. Anybody want to chip in on that? I've got a further question, if not.
Ask your next question.
Well, along the lines of, there is a lot of misinformation around about all sorts of issues. Lots of people blame the internet, and that's no doubt true to some extent. But it doesn't necessarily affect policy making. So there was a lot of misinformation going around about COVID vaccines, but it didn't really change government policy. There is misinformation about nuclear power, but most governments, I think, understand that actually it's a very safe and efficient way of producing energy. I suppose the difference with misinformation about vapes and other alternative nicotine products is that the misinformation isn't coming from anonymous trolls on the internet. It's coming from experts, self-proclaimed perhaps, but experts right up to and including very much the WHO. So again, I guess there's a kind of a credibility issue insofar as I'm quite happy to go off and call the WHO the FIFA of health and incompetent and corrupt and so on. But I don't know how much good it would do me if I was saying that to a policymaker. Most people, I think, basically assume that the WHO is a force for good in the world. They associate it with eradicating smallpox and so on, and they would find it hard to believe that they are being systematically dishonest about anything in particular. And that would also apply to many public health academics, professors in esteemed universities and so on. Now, we know that very often on this issue at least, they're not telling the whole truth. But again, who is a policymaker to believe? So I guess my question is, how hard would you go at organizations like the WHO? Would you try and be very polite about them and say, but, however, maybe they're not quite right on this? Or would you be a bit more full-throttled in your criticism? Whoever.
Well, I mean, with any argument, I think that there's room to open the conversation with where you agree with them. And maybe it's nothing on nicotine whatsoever. but you can acknowledge that the WHO does good in other sectors in the world. But if you're going to, so again, you can acknowledge that, and then pointedly identify exactly why it is that you disagree with them. I've read several WHO reports, and I have a whole list going on my computer of things that I want to directly engage with, either engage with the WHO on or call out them using their own words, because I think that they are empirically and systematically wrong on some things. So just one example here, the idea of smuggling in illicit trade. The WHO stance is, as far as I can tell, to cover your eyes and pretend that it doesn't exist. To me, that's not acceptable, and we have loads of empirical data that show that things like prohibitions and higher taxes result in more smuggling and more illicit trade. I think it's a slam dunk empirical observation that we can say, you said this and we think you're wrong. Now, I think that there's nothing wrong with going, I would like to go toe to toe on some issues with them, specifically the ones that we know they're completely wrong on. And so, I think there's room to say that, because I don't think you want to be the person that's saying, that you're a conspiracy theorist, or that everyone in the world and every government is out to get you and and spy on you, because I think in reality that's also that's a misconception, that's a misperception of what the WHO is trying to do. I think that most people, this is my personal opinion here, most people in the WHO are trying to do what they think is best, but I think that what they think is best and what I think is best are very different things, and we can try to, again, sort of from the scientific perspective, engage and go toe-to-toe on issue-specific issues.
Yeah, I agree with you that people tend to think in these conspiracy theories or whatever with someone who disagrees, but most of the cases, in my experience, is people with a different opinion. That's just it. So in Congress it happens very often. Some politicians are regarded as very powerful, but actually they are not. So that's also another sort of misinformation. Some institutions are regarded as much more powerful than what they are. And we should look at this as simple as possible. Okay, it's someone with a different opinion or different concerns maybe, or maybe they are just scared. So I think addressing, talking to them with the WHO or whoever it is, and finding solutions. And if they are doing something wrong, there should be some sort of felony. So it eventually will be shown that someone is committing like a crime or something. So that's one standard we take with politicians, for instance, because people say, oh, they are like stealing money from this regulation. And in fact, it's not. And eventually, it will be seen if they are having some sort of agreement with bad actors to, I don't know, to get some sort of bribe. So ideally, we should expect the best, think the best, and if we don't find that, well, then report to the authorities. But talking to the other sides and hearing what's going on, and maybe we can be wrong in some things, and that's okay.
I said this morning that the size of the NRT market in 2022 was $3 billion US, and Fortune in its analysis says that by 2028 it will be $4 billion. But if you add in the vaping side of things, it's 59 billion. So that big difference is because of the vaping side of things. But who stands to gain with any policy? It's always look at who stands to gain by the outcome of the regulation, and you have to look that the pharmaceutical industry is the concerned largely by the vaping industry eating its lunch on nicotine delivery. And also, as I said this morning, there's absolutely no voices really who are raising that. People sort of point the finger at the WHO, but yes, as I indicated clearly this morning as well, that in 2000 at the Chicago World Conference on Tobacco or Health, there was an alliance agreed in their declaration to have an alliance between the WHO, the pharmaceutical industry, international organizations, and the World Bank together, all to do tobacco control activity. And as we see, that is already in the FCTC in Article 14D, to give the payback to the pharmaceutical industry that every government has a role of in its implementing its tobacco control policies to ensure that pharmaceutical products are part of that equation. We don't really say anything about it. This needs to be talked about. It needs to be, the industry interference is not necessarily from the tobacco industry. The industry interference is from the pharmaceutical industry, and no one really is saying anything about it. There is absolute evidence there. The article that was written in the BMJ in 2006, really looking at the WHO funding, where it's coming from, why it's there, and looking always to the money. I think we need to use those arguments a lot more, bring out the arguments that Ricardo said earlier about the flavours. Why is it that the youth in the US, the youth rate has dropped by 2%? As someone else we know, Dave Sweener, often says, it's actually the illicit disposable market that is responsible for that decline in youth usage of the drop in smoking rates. And yet it's one of those things that we should be talking about a lot more, but in a consistent way, whether we're the scientist, the policymaker, the consumer, along very clear lines to dispel those myths at whatever level or whatever organisational area that we participate in.
And what do you think, Jeannie or any of you, what do you think the role of industry should be here, both the vaping industry and the tobacco industry? Because consumers haven't really got any resources. The industry's got quite a bit of money. But on the other hand, we're in a debate here which unfortunately has become rather childish, and it's a lot of finger pointing, and are we all involved with industry in some sense, therefore we'll disregard you. These are the white coats from the WHO, therefore we'll believe them. What do you think the industry should be doing? Do they cause more harm than good if they fund studies that show that vaping is much better than perhaps people think, or should they stay out of it, or do consumer groups need their cash?
I think industry staying away from the academic studies would be a nice wall to put up. I do think that if a study is funded by industry, it immediately becomes tainted in the eyes of not only those in academia sometimes, but certainly as that gets passed along in the political world. I think that, industry should do what they do really well, keep making safer products, and then marketing those products and their safer features, right? Industry is really good at being innovative and attracting customers. I think that's what they should continue to do. And if you have a large vaping base, then they can speak in opposition to the regulations when they come up, if they get an opportunity. So I think industry's engagement is to, again, make better products, attract consumers, and then if they're going to be politically engaged, which we know industry is around the world, then they can amplify the scientific effects, a lot better than scientists do ourselves, right? So they can take it and make promotional videos and flyers and advertisements and again, do what they do well on the marketing side to get customers, but do it to spread knowledge.
I think what you said earlier about telling stories is really important. I think they do resonate far more than a lot of facts and figures. But I think definitely that's an important thing to get things out. But it's almost like, and I think, wherever I go, whether it's in a taxi, at the beauticians, or, wherever, I always talk to people who know nothing about this area at the most sort of general area, and people are always really amazed. They don't know what we all know. And I think, you know, if you could get that amplifying going a lot more and sort of say, I mean, probably most people here would do that anyway, but get people talking to other people, get those stories resonating, because they will resonate. And really, I think consumers, more than any other entity, can actually bring about significant change. I mean, look what happened in Europe in 2014 with the Tobacco Products Directive, when at the very last moment it was switched round from looking like e-cigarettes were going to be regulated as medicinal products to being consumer products. And it was even done so late in the day that even in the TPD from 2014, they didn't even have time to get the alphabetical order of the definitions done in time. I mean, it was that late in the day. And consumers absolutely did that. And I think anyone who underestimates consumers. But I think consumers also need to learn a little bit more about the science of what they're doing, or you know, they know all about the mechanics, they know how it's worked for them, but actually be able to talk a little bit more about the nicotine, why it's useful, and that sort of thing. Because I do find, unless you're, you know, in this sort of group, most consumers don't really know how that compares to a cigarette. They don't know, you know, they'll say, is it equal to a box, or is it equal to one, or how does it work? A few little bits and pieces like that of absolutes, I think, would help them talk to other smokers, talk to others as well, and explain how, and also how the product is going to work differently. Because I know, having spoken to smokers, that, you know, they smoke a cigarette in a particular way, but when they try a vape, it's a very different experience. But explain to them how that experience is going to be different and how it might take time. And it just builds more and more of the army, I suppose, of people who are going around talking about it, which, you know, hopefully will dispel myths. And I think, lastly, you think of this industry in a very short time has made a remarkable difference to the world and really brought smoking down in countries like the UK. So it is working. It just needs to be a bit more organised and focused, if it can be, in my view.
And I should say, the next panel is going to be about consumer voices in the fight against misinformation. So let's explore that further in that panel. Pablo, you got any view on what should the industry stay out of it and just hope that other scientists can find funding to do good research?
I don't think any industry funding science is wrong. I mean, if you are informing where are the funds coming in the paper, the paper is peer review, and I mean, it's okay to be skeptical on a paper funded by a stakeholder, but I mean, we need more science, not less science. So, if the industry, whichever industry is willingly to fund studies on tobacco or on anything, I don't think we have to stigmatize. Maybe be skeptical, but not stigmatize.
Can I hop in
Please
real
do.
quick? Because I want to add one thing that I think industry should not do. I think industry should learn some lessons from what has happened. And we talked about trying to directly address fears. I think industry has done itself a disservice, especially in the vaping space in some areas. If you look at perhaps the biggest concern for the Food and Drug Administration in the United States is youth vaping. And you have some of the early vaping products on the market then creating marketing campaigns that are cartoon characters and cotton candy and cereal flavors, devices, and then they market that. And I mean, it took 5 or 6 years for those ads to be pulled and then heavy fines to be levied. But I wish industry itself would take some of these lessons that we're talking about as well, right? And so if these are the fears of your regulators, then please don't play right into their concerns.
Yeah, it's a bit of almost a no-win situation, isn't it? Because you can't be sure, particularly in some countries, that the government is going to release funding to scientists who they suspect might do, research that is positive towards e-cigarettes. And I do know that, BAT, for example, they publish a huge number of studies, actually, but they never make it into newspapers because they're far too complicated and sciencey. They're about, the chemical compounds and deep toxicological stuff, which I think does add to the pool of human knowledge, and probably scientists in that area don't really mind that it's funded by BAT because it's replicable and so on. But it does make it difficult when one side, which potentially has a lot of resources to get things changed, is demonized. I think the whole debate, I think, keeps coming back to resources and incentives, doesn't it? How do we get resources and incentives to the right people? I want to ask you about the media, because they have their own incentives, which is generally to report bad news. And I think it's naive to complain about the media for reporting sensationalist studies, because there's obviously no news value to saying this has been another day when thousands of people switched from smoking to e-cigarettes. And people complain, particularly in Britain, where we have a lot of tabloid newspapers. People complain quite rightly when the Daily Mail or the Sun will publish some sensationalist thing based on a junk study and make it even worse in the telling. But these newspapers don't actually have any particular beef with vaping. It's just that they know that these stories will sell. The Sun hasn't got any problem with vaping, but there's a front page a few years ago saying vaping worse than fags, fags being cigarettes, I should explain. But yeah, it sells newspapers. Is this an intractable problem with the media, that they're not interested in good news? Is there anything that can be done? Is it, or put it another way, is there a good news story that would appeal to the media because they can tell it in a certain way?
Well, I was just thinking again about in the UK that you can go and buy a cool fruit nicotine product at the age of 12 without parental approval from the chemist shop, so long as it's a nicotine replacement therapy product. And yet, no, we know that, but does anybody actually say anything about it? You could, stage some sort of bad news thing that make the media be aware of something like that. I don't know. But then when you think to the good side of the argument, do you want to go down that sort of bad tactical route or not? Because nicotine, in my view, is if you're going to use whatever nicotine product you're going to use to switch, it doesn't really matter whether it's an NRT or a vape or something else. So, is that a slippery slope to go down and find other things? But there's too many incongruities in the debate, and that's what's causing double standards and politicians to be, look. What Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has done. He hasn't listened to anything, and he's, coming across as an idiot.
Yes, indeed. Anybody else? You want to chip in on the intractable problem of the media being addicted to bad news?
I think that's a global phenomenon. And I don't think that you're ever going to get them to not do that. And so again, I'll leave the exact strategies to the marketing folks, but I think that a continued approach of getting the truthful information out there on a regular and consistent basis, and then if there's a false story that runs, you engage with the correct audience in the correct way in saying, this is an exaggerated story, this is not the case, by the way, 95% less harmful, and then continue the positive messaging the way that you've been doing.
Yeah, and one more thing, if one newspaper is saying something that's wrong, you can go to another newspaper to expose that this newspaper is not telling the truth. And they are competing with each other. So fake news should be appealing in the short term, but in the long run, media is mortgaging their name and their prestige by doing that. And
they've been doing it a long time. They should get away with it. Roberto, you want to make a point?
Yeah, if we are in the issue of mudslinging, which is very common in tabloids, and not only tabloids, then why not mudsling the person who did this scandalous study?
Yeah.
But you need some organization, because smearing by press is not spontaneous. There is people moving that, especially the US. But and so some scandal in the media then you have another tabloid exposing them with the same mud. It's something similar to what you say.
And also, some countries have the right, I don't know if it's in the UK, for the person affected to answer. For instance, a former president of Argentina, she was portrayed for an Italian newspaper as buying very expensive stuff and like a corrupt politician. She was Christina, and she said, "No, this is a lie." And she forced this newspaper to tell the truth. She wasn't doing that. Disregarding if you like or not her as a politician, but she forced them to tell the truth, and it was a lie. She wasn't like in a shopping spree in Milan or whatever. Also, our actual president did a lot of that. He forced the newspapers to recognize they were telling a lie. Now, the newspaper doesn't like this, but I think they should get used to that, because people are starting to defend when they feel affected in their honor or in the job or whatever the media is saying. Well, I think that's okay.
Yes, I mean, the problem is, I suppose, a lot of the time we're not talking about libeling people, we're talking about studies being reported in a sensationalist way, and very often the journalist can say, well, that's what the study said, more or less, and unfortunately, that's true. I mean, the study did say that. So then the next step, I guess, is trying to replicate the study or write a letter to the journal, and that's all very low profile, and the media will never probably know about that. Let me ask you one final question, because we're running out of time. Again, it comes down to the question of resources. There's only so many hours in the day. There's an endless amount of stuff to debunk. Are you familiar with the bullshit asymmetry principle? That the amount of energy required to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude greater than the amount required to create it. So given we only have so many hours in the day, what gives us the best bang for our buck when it comes to debunking information? Is it calling up radio shows, writing letters to the newspaper, meeting politicians face to face? I mean, speak to this from your own personal, experience and careers, if you will. But what's perhaps the most efficient way of doing this?
In our experience, talking to the politicians, because they are leaders for their constituencies, so they can explain things and even change an agenda of their constituencies. So I think it's the faster way, because if the politicians are talking about this, then the media is talking about this. But the opposite is not necessarily true. Sometimes the media is talking about things and the politician doesn't care. So if you have access to a politician, it doesn't need to be a president. It could be just a deputy. And if you create like this group of politicians talking about the issue, eventually it becomes politics. And if it becomes politics, it's in the news, and people will know. In our experience, it's a very cheap and effective way to communicate.
I would say the best way to communicate is on talkback radio. I think you hear the true stories from people who've really experienced an issue, whether it's a change from something to the other. The other night in UK, or it's called LBC, I'm not sure what it stands for.
London Broadcasting.
It's not London, it's listening to British...
Is it?
Something.
No,
and
that's just a
it's
slogan.
not London,
It's
no.
London.
Listening
LBC?
to Britain's
Conversation.
conversation,
That's a
yeah.
slogan. It
Yeah.
doesn't stand for it.
Yeah, well, anyway,
let's not get stuck in the weeds on this.
the talkback radio, they had 3 hours, and people, vapors from all kinds were able to ring in. Now, if you were a person listening to that, and that has a massive audience over the entire UK, people would hear that, whatever side of the debate they're on, but they would have been influenced by the people ringing up, who were ringing up, giving real live stories. And I think probably I would say radio is a better way, because you get it from the horse's mouth, you get a lot more bang for the buck. It's not just a headline or something like that. I think radio is a way that we should pursue in terms of myth busting.
And anyone can do it as well.
Anyone
Unlike
can do it.
think tanks going to see the president. It's
Yeah.
easy for anyone to do.
I would say write. Write down your thoughts, write down your opinions, write down your science, and publish what you can. I mean, in my personal experience, I spent a decade in academia. I moved to a think tank with a much broader network and reach. I wrote 2 blog posts in my first month of working at the think tank, and they had more reads, page views, downloads than the sum of 10 years of academic work. And I published a good amount in academia. Now, I would say play to your strengths. There are people that can reach millions with a tweet. And so you can be prolific on social media and reach a lot of people. But if that content isn't backed up by substance or isn't, again, well targeted or well messaged, then that is not as useful, right? If you're a scientist and don't like to tweet, then do really good academic research and publish it and hand it off to the people who are going to tweet for you. But in general, I think whatever you do, write your ideas down, get them published, and get them out there in the world for people to read and other people to find them.
Just one thing extra, I'd give a plug for Clive Bates's counterfactual website, because that has everything there in a very succinct, clear way, both scientific and policy information and consumers in. He encourages people to write stuff there. And I would often say when people want to find something out or communicate something, it's all going to be reliable and well worth going to the counterfactual.
Yes, and Clive is one of the people who hasn't got exhausted by doing this somehow. I don't know how he has the stamina. Anyway, thank you very much indeed to panel. The next one is also about misinformation, but with an emphasis on consumer voices. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
turn off my phone.
Oh,
Good.
Hi everyone, welcome to this panel. It's about consumer voices are necessary to fight against misinformation. When it comes to harm reduction, and I believe we can all agree here that harm reduction has been pushed and have been something that has been leading through the consumer advocacy. When we talk about HIV, when we talk about sexual health, when we talk about harm reduction in illicit and licit drugs, we can all agree that advocates have been done a lot to help advance in public health. So I would like to begin talking or discussing with you guys, how do you visualize your role to advance public health as consumer advocates for harm reduction? Want to take it? No, I can start.
Hello, everyone. I'm Juan José Sirión. I'm introducing myself because I missed the first session where I was supposed to introduce myself, going to the media room on Monday. I'm a court lawyer from the biggest university in Mexico. And also, I'm a teacher of philosophy of law in the same university. So the people who litigate and have philosophical background are kind of a weird kind of lawyers. And that's why I started ONG called México y el Mundo Vapeando, Mexico and the World Vaping, to start to protect the people from the supposed prohibitions that were coming from the U.S. The truth is that the prohibitions in the U.S. never came as they came into Mexico. And talking about this subject is, okay, I'm also the author of this book called El concepto de reducción de daños y los derechos humanos, the concept of harm reduction and human rights, where we try to see how the human rights are going to the concept of harm reduction. It's not a philosophical book. It was made with the idea that the general people could understand the way these human rights go to the concept of harm reduction, so they can defend them when talking with regulators or other authorities. So in my case, what we saw is that we were preparing to be attacked by these prohibitions in Mexico. That's why we started this ONG. And what happened is that through presidential decrees in Mexico City, in Mexico, in the whole country, the presidential decrees has been the base for prohibition of all the alternatives of nicotine. So when we were trying to use this ONG to promote, NGO, to promote the human rights, so the people who are using these alternatives knew, we could get a good network of consumers. So when we started to think about the strategies to fight back legally the prohibitions, we could get a lot of people who would help us to start trials against these prohibitions. We, at the first decree, could get 300 injunctions against the prohibition decree, thanks to the consumers that were interested in this kind of strategy to fight back the prohibition. At this moment, we started about 1,000 trials against the prohibitions. We have won like 20%, which is very good because in these kind of cases, if I start 1,000 trials and win one, that one goes to the media immediately. So this is the first step that I think we need to do to have the people consider themselves advocates to protect vaping.
What about you, Maria? I know that you come from a country that have a deep history of harm reduction.
Yeah. So I feel, sorry, I got an email today that they want to ban Zonic in a province, rumor has it that they want to ban Zonic, which is a nicotine pouch, in the very province where harm reduction went to the Superior Court of Canada and won. In the very province that is fighting for safer drugs. And I'll be very honest, I believe in harm reduction right throughout the whole spectrum. Because if I'm going to fight with this, I'm going to walk my talk and I'm going to learn everything there is to do with harm reduction in my country. And I'm going to go towards that with compassion because I want people to treat me that way with my fight. And I think going back to this, one of the things that as starting this movement for rights for vapors, because we're not an organization, we don't have a board, sort of like me trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. But one of the things that was very important is education. The more we know, the more empowered we are to engage. And just like you said, teaching people about things that are important when we're talking with legislation. So we spent the COVID time bringing in experts from around the world and talking to people who vape in Canada, and then bringing in Health Canada for the first time ever, met with Canadians who vape. It was the first time ever that this department engaged with the very people that they were regulating. And it opened it up, it changed, because the people that were learning and once they felt that empowerment, you know what, I've got enough where I need to learn more, they went to Health Canada and demanded, we need to be part of this process. And we have a consumer advisory board. I'm not on it because I used to own a vape shop, and that's just the big V right here. You know, when women had affairs and they put the scarlet letter of A, well, in Canada, and I guess up there, we all have the scarlet letter of V. So be it. But I can't participate. But how happy I am is to see people there every 6 to 8 weeks. They're sharing their feedback. They're saying, yeah, we looked at the website and we're like, that is wrong. That is, oh God, what's that word? Derogatory language. That's not the way you should say it. And they've made impacts to the detriment of the NGOs that don't like us. So what's happening now is that we're trying to replicate that at the provincial level. But education
And I know for me, if I am not confident, I am shaking. And if I don't know something, I get nervous. I can't fake it till I make it all the time. So I read and I learn. And then I feel that if we do that same and offer those learnings and offer those opportunities for people to connect with other experts, they too will be empowered. And we've proven that. And I'm going to leave this as my last example. I'm going to go to Marianne Burt. She's a 76-year-old retired school teacher who has just literally spoken at every single government event, every single government consultation. And she walks in there all hobbling up like this, and then all of a sudden this wah comes. Like, she knows how to play it. But there is a province in Canada, it's one of our smaller northern provinces, that's planning on adding an excise tax, so each bottle of e-liquid would be $20 more expensive in this province. She decided to email them all, and now she's their subject matter expert on vaping. They're emailing her and asking her for studies. They're emailing her and asking her why this information is wrong. And that's because she did it. What I'm trying to say is you can do it. Consumers can do it. Whatever you need to feel empowered, call up the organizations that are saying they're fighting for consumers. Call them and say, teach me, let me learn, because it's those little fights, those little moments in time that add up, and you will end up having a conversation with the right person that's going to talk to the right person, that's going to get to the person that's going to make the change. Just like Marion, she literally emailed them all, and now she's their vaping expert. So that's just my advice when it comes to consumer and consumer organizations.
Actually, a really valuable advice to get motivated and encouraged to do something. That leads me to Kurt, because in South Africa, they have been discussing a bill regarding vaping and nicotine and devices and harm reduction products. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, I think the bill, the bill is literally throw everything at the wall and hopefully something will stick. So it literally takes anything that might have nicotine in it and include it in the bill. So there's no differentiation between tobacco delivery systems, whether they have nicotine, whether they don't have nicotine. They throw flavors into there. They even throw in standards and giving the minister pretty much all the authority to make a decision on what kind of devices, the emissions, packaging, where it can be sold, where it can't be sold, and so forth. So it's just an omnibus of just prohibitions, soft prohibitions. They'll come out and say, well, we're not actually banning the product. We're just, making sure that it's regulated. But they're regulated to such an extent that you won't be able to get it anywhere and won't be able to use it anywhere effectively. But in terms of the misinformation thing, I mean, that's the basis of the movement that I co-founded in 2017 called Vaping Saved My Life. And it started off as a testimonial page on Facebook. But in 2019, we moved it over to a web page. And part of that was to include facts. And part of those facts was a repository of studies that we've collected and managed to find and help people understand some of this based on these studies. But misinformation with regards to where it comes from is key on how you approach it. If it's an individual and you're having a conversation and they have this misnomer that vaping causes popcorn lung, or you have water in the lung, or EVALI, or something like that, then having an open and honest discussion, understanding what their fears are and where they heard it from, and then have those discussions with them. But if that misinformation is coming from more organized sources, then it's very important that you have the material to back what you say. And I find it very, very important, or a good way of approaching this is actually asking questions. Asking questions around the logic behind some of these things. So, for example, a very popular one that's been around since 2016, for example, popcorn lung. You'll ask them how many cases of popcorn lung. Do they actually understand what popcorn lung is? Where did popcorn lung get its name from? What is popcorn lung? And all these questions around that. And you'll be quite amazed at how little they do actually know. Even some of the most which you would consider knowledgeable sources, how little they know. They've just grabbed onto something and used it as a giant bat to knock you down, because it's now become part of urban legend, there's popcorn. But you'll find out very quickly that very few people actually really understand what they're talking about. The same thing applies to Avali from the United States. Not many people know that it's a very short-lived incident based on contaminated source, an illegal contaminated source. But unfortunately, because of what media has done and what we've seen is that it's literally gathered momentum and has a life of itself. So a lot of the times we feel like broken records, but that's the idea, is you have to keep repeating yourself time and time again, go back to the sources, and making sure that you keep on top of any new developments that are happening. So that's pretty much how I tackle it. It depends where it's coming from.
And how South Africa has been receiving attacks of misinformation, and sometimes it's really difficult to correct those wrong information that has been dissipated through, the media and some institutions. One place that we usually look for, it's the UK. What the UK have done. Because there's several institutions, not only the Public Health England, now called the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, but the Cochrane King College, and this is a country that it was on the border. Well, the kingdom was a kingdom. That is, it was on the border of prohibition. That it was the brave advocacy of people like David Dorm that began that movement to not allow to get this harm reduction products banned. So, Mark, what can you tell us about the whole thing in UK? Because we know that is a reference for us when it comes to harm reduction, and what is going on?
Yeah, so it was a pretty close run thing, as you've alluded to. There was a strong possibility that vaping in the UK was going to be prescription only and medicalised, and really it was just some people in number 10 that saw the opportunity and decided to see what would come of it, because they looked at the science that was available at the time. And we have been pretty good, and I would go to conferences like this and people would say, yeah, the UK, brilliant, excellent, yeah, why can't our countries be like the UK? But now, with what's coming out, with a ban on disposables and a potential flavour ban, I just think it's a strong warning to vapers everywhere that you can think you have a pretty good system going, but you should never let your guard down. And sadly, I think vapers in the UK, as much as many very strong advocates work very hard, I would speak to vapers who, no, we're very supportive of vaping. No, I don't need to respond to this consultation. No, I don't need to write to my MP. But you've got to look at other movements, like the environmental movement, and whatever you think about some of their policies, we can all see that they don't give up. The British government would announce things such as being net zero by 2050. They would announce they're banning combustible engine cars, but that wouldn't stop them going in, week out, to stop the traffic around London, to stop planes flying, to throw paint at very expensive paintings. I'm not necessarily suggesting we should follow their tactics. I don't think they always work, but I think that passion and that belief that let's not stop doing what we're doing is really important. And in regards to misinformation, look, I'm not by any means blaming vapers in the UK. I think you can always do more. Ultimately, there was a tide coming from the media, a narrative about youth vaping, which was never, the media had never any intention of actually looking at the facts and considering the point that really the group that needs to be, the public needs to be most concerned about is the millions of people that are smoking and that are going to die from it, not actually a small percentage of youth that used to smoke and are now using vaping products. And actually the number of regular users is pretty low. But the part of that issue is that misinformation. And mums and dads are pretty strong forces when it comes to politics. I worked on a campaign to legalise medical cannabis, and that involved a mum whose son had a health issue which gave him seizures, and prescription THC stopped him having seizures. And within 6 weeks, medical cannabis went from being illegal to legalised because the public, there's two things: a mother concerned about the health of their child, and the public seeing a child that's very ill, And so that was amazing how quickly that happened. And for some, well, not for some reason, it's quite obvious, but children are very important to us, and older people dying aren't quite as important, sadly, but we should care about older people. It's just a little bit harder to get that message across. The other side of it, and this is where it comes to misinformation of vaping and also this subject of medical cannabis, the public had been primed for years that medical cannabis was something that could cure all sorts of things. Now, some of those stories in the press actually weren't necessarily accurate, but there was something in the back of people's minds. Yes, I've read the Daily Mail consistently and talking about it. Well, with this subject, it's the complete opposite. The public are primed to say that anything to do with nicotine is bad. And I'd love it if there were more stories, factual, scientific stories, pointing out that there are some medical benefits to nicotine. And more research needs to be done in areas of Alzheimer's, but protective ability. So in regards to individual vapors, particularly, and Jeannie spoke earlier on the panel, and she, for me, is, she's like the godmother of this. I'll get into the cab in London with her, and she will just talk to the taxi driver about vaping. I have to remind myself, I've got to do the same thing here. And as many people can do that, spread that information, inform people, and tell your story. What we try and do, We Vape, my consumer advocacy group in the UK, is get consumers to go speak to their politicians and tell that story. And you often find the people that smoked and then switched, they have the most passion, they have a huge amount of knowledge. I mean, I learn so much from other vapors, and some of the slides I've got, whenever I see misinformation, I've borrowed from some brilliant people around the internet. But politicians want to hear those stories, and as was mentioned on the panel before, data on its own isn't enough. You need to inform and tell those stories and tell a politician, look, I would still be smoking now. In terms of the media, there's no doubt that radio phone-ins that were talked about earlier are very important. And the media made a switch in the UK quite recently. Before the ban of disposables was announced, the media would very rarely have anyone on the radio that wanted to talk positively about vaping. But as soon as that ban was announced, the media started to take a more interested view on people that had the opposite view to what the government were doing. And so I was listening to talking panels where the presenter was being quite reasonable, and people were calling in and telling their stories. And I think Australia is a really interesting example of that. I've seen some of the media start to make that shift. And some of the advocates in Australia are just the best. And almost the worse situation you're in, the more it brings you out. But vapors have got to, coming back to my first point, remember that you're only a few stops away from ending up like Australia.
Mm-hmm.
One of the organizations that have been, best of getting people talk about their situation and how and their experience through these harm reduction products, it's South Africa, actually. And with Vaping Saved My Life, I know that I have been seen a ton of, of their experiences being expressed on social media, on website and everything. So how can we encourage people to share their stories? Kurt?
With great difficulty and persistence.
Nag them.
And it doesn't. It helps to be quite big and intimidating. I think one of the most important things is the local vape shops. All your small mom and pop vape shops. The person behind that counter has had those experiences. So if you can convince them to share, and then move on and convince them to speak to their customers, because they form bonds and relationships. I'm not talking about where you buy a disposable behind the cigarette counter and that. I'm talking about the genuine, old school, mom and pop vape shop where it's family owned, family run, and they eventually start forming those relationships with their customers. They understand what their customers have gone through. They understand the trials. And if you have a relationship with those small vape shops and you keep pressing them to find individuals that have a fantastic story to tell, and let me be honest, any story involving the quitting smoking is a fantastic story. Some of them are really dramatic, some of them are very horrific, but all of them are fantastic stories. And therefore we encourage these people. And sometimes people are shy, you'll notice that some of our testimonials won't have a profile pic or anything like that. But it's important that those stories get shared, because I'm always a firm believer. I come from a data background. And what I realized from a very early on when I started this process is that there's a lot of metadata behind that spreadsheet. And that metadata is stories. And it's not just their own stories. My story involves my parents and my son. Because the impact of smoking not only impacted me and my parents, but it's impacted my son. So therefore, if we can tell those stories, and hopefully we get more and more people to do that, we then have to point media, ministers, or policymakers and have those people have their stories read, seen. And I think that's pretty much the key around this, is because the science is pretty much, in my view, quite conclusive. It's been around for a good while. These products help people quit smoking. These products are significantly less harmful. They've displaced smoke or cigarettes in many parts of the world. Unfortunately, not in South Africa. But what's the next step is to have that now bolstered with the justification with stories. So yes, I think getting back to the original ask is that it's persistence and having those relationships with the small shops and having them become your voice and asking those questions on your behalf and getting them to then join.
When I think of people and testimonials, I immediately think, for example, things like what the Vaping Save My Life movement have done. But I cannot resist to think about one additional step that someone took. And that is getting those testimonials and mobilize those testimonials. And that's what Right for Vapor did. Remember Right for Vapors, they put them on the bus.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And they mobilized it in front of many, many places.
Yes, I'm known as the bus lady. The lady with the wrapped bus was my nickname with Canadian Secret Service during the last election.
So your code name?
Yeah, that was my code name. I did mistaken the RCMP officers that were protecting our prime minister with media and ran up to them saying, "Do you want to hear the story?" until I was stopped. The best thing is elections. Everybody wants to hear your story. Everybody wants to. And we had a bus. If you read the anti-vaping side of my bus was luxury. My bus had this. My bus was from 1997. Decor included. So we had that beautiful flowers, and we had the poofy curtains, the balloon curtains. But we took that bus, we wrapped that bus. We got my friend Yolanda, she drove the bus. My old employee, Michael, he took videos, and we went door to door into different communities, and we told politicians, you've got to make a change. And the other great thing was in each community, we met with the people who this would affect the most. Because if there was, I don't know everybody in, Trois-Rivières, Quebec, but we met people in Quebec. So we showed up at the vape shops with the bus. They signed the bus. And it was so amazing. So we have this bus of history, and we have pictures of it. But we went, and one of the things we found out was people are afraid of the bus. So politicians were afraid of me. They would see this bus come in, and we would see everybody lock everything up. But those stories came out because we brought one of their constituents. I didn't vote for you. Here's someone that lives in your riding who you want their vote, because that's your currency. On any election, for those, however long your election period is, ours is usually about 60 days, that is your currency, your vote. And we've done this multiple times, not with the bus. The bus was expensive. It was hot. But it's really about getting the stories out. And then we got some of the vaping industry people got together, and we went down to Ottawa, our capital, and as we're doing the protest, there is this bus with messaging saying, you know, I quit smoking, and sharing stories, and that bus is going all through the capital in Ottawa. I mean, some of this stuff does cost money, but going door to door or mobilizing people during an election, we vape, we vote, that is so catchy, looks great on a sticker, and it works. And sometimes it can be as simple as the leader of the party showing up in your community, because obviously during an election they have the rah-rah-rahs, and you all go there, put a little sticker, we vape, we vote, or however you say it in your language. Show up there. Someone will pay attention. And I can tell you that the premier of my province, Doug Ford, who's not very well liked anywhere, but we went over and over and over again. But at the first one, he looked at me and he said, I promise you, I have your back. I see your passion. And when he took office, he reversed 4 bills, and vaping was one of them. And no one in the world could figure out why, except for us who vape. And it's no one's business in the media why he did that. But he loved our passion. He loved our chutzpah, or whatever you call it. And that's where the personal connection, the people who vote, that's the people there. And also, someone said something about vape shops. Mm-hmm. Vape shops are the news hub. If you own a vape shop, share the information. Allow your customers the choice of what they can do. I would be mortified if one of my customers said to me, I don't have them anymore, but if at the time said to me, I didn't know. That means I failed. I removed a choice from a consumer to know. And as a vape shop, and anyone that owns a vape shop, that's part of your responsibility. Get the information out. Don't force someone to fill out a petition. Mm-hmm. Don't force someone to tell a story. But let them have that option. And I hate it when they're like, oh, I don't want to force something down their throat. Well, you're complaining we don't have community? You're complaining it's not like the old days because we have disposables and stuff, or they're going there. Maybe people will start returning to the vape shop because I'll know what's going on. I'll know when flavors may be banned. I know when a tax might come in, and I'll have a choice to do something. And that's the other thing. Vape shops need to step up, allowing information to flow through their places.
That phrase, I vape, I vote, has been translated into many languages. One of them, and in Spanish, one of them, that is actually the equivalent to yo vapeo, yo voto. There has been screamed from the top of the lungs of many Mexicans in front of the health ministry. And what can we do to amplify that?
Yes. I hear the people in the table talking about their experiences, but unfortunately, we are not in the same ground. In Mexico, we have a lot of different problems. For example, 5 years ago, you could find a vape shop, so you could get some advice from the people from the vape shop, but now almost all the vape shops are closed. All the commerce is electronical. Very few vape shops open. We have a prohibition, not from the Congress, but from the president, from a decree, and with a very powerful president who can press the deputies in their labor to say, I will send a bill and you will not change a comma. So you can go to talk with the deputies or the senators, and they are not going to change a comma from what the president is going to present. So we have to do it in a different way. First, as Jeffrey said, we started to use this hashtag, yo vapeo, yo voto, that is, I vape, I vote. And even there's a very good song with that name. You've heard that from one of the very ¿cómo se dice?
You have a song?
No, not mine.
Oh.
From it's a rapper, but you know this hard-hitting rapper. activist called Balam. He made this song that Yo Voto, Yo Vapeo. It's a very good one. Look for it. And then we had to change strategies. At first, when we were trying to give information to the people, México y el Mundo Vapeando had to stop doing what it was doing and then allied with two people that you may know, Roberto Sussman and Tomás O'Gorman, and open a new association called Pro Vapeo México. This association had the goal to give information to the users, to the public, and when we started Pro Vapeo México, we thought that the good thing we could do is to send letters to the deputies, to the president, to the people from the health ministry. Nothing helped us in any way until we decided to change the idea. And then we get to what I told you before. If we cannot get anything by the good way of talking with the politicians, then we have to go to trial. Then we have to go to the judges to make our voice heard, and then start changing the prohibitions because the judges are saying that the prohibitions go against human rights. So in one way, the political part at least let us open doors to try to talk with the politicians, even when right now they cannot do anything different from what the president orders, but that's still, when I talk to a deputy right now, and I ask him, what do you think that our president is trying to make a prohibition on a constitutional level that is something completely out of the normal? They say, no, it's very bad, but I cannot do anything. But at least they know, okay? So at least they have some kind of conscience that what is happening is not right, that they have to do something because they are pressed by the president, but they know that they are not doing well. And that's the first step. And the second step with this kind of governments is if the only power that is independent from the president is the judicial, you have to go to the judicial power to try to solve these kind of matters. And that's what we've been doing at least for the last 5 years.
Jeffrey, I just want to jump in here, is that what makes some of these conferences so vital for consumer groups is this ability to share and understand what the experiences are. We've got a rap now, so I'm sure Maria and I are thinking, who can we ask to rap?
Oh, I thought you meant Iraq has joined. I was like, what? Sorry, it's the accent. I'm just a bad Canadian. I can't understand accents.
I'm just a staunch South African. So I think that's what these conferences are so important, is that consumer groups get to now understand and hear the complexities and the difficulties that are happening around the world. But it also allows us to share ideas, or at least, mimic or maybe just get inspired about doing something different.
I agree.
And I think that's why it's vital that consumers and consumer groups are in the mix, is because they're on the ground. They're speaking to the people that these products are most affecting, and these policies are most affecting. And that's why I'm really appreciative of TPA and the work that they're doing here, and having people like myself and Maria and a number of other consumers engage, network, share, understand the complexities that are outside our own little bubbles. Because sometimes you do get stuck in a bubble, in your own thing. And sometimes you do get a bit,
But we can never forget. But one thing that's so true, you do everything you do because of the people, to help them have a better quality of life. And if we ever lose track of that, is when I feel that failure happens. If we forget about why we do the things, maybe it's our own story, maybe it's the story of someone that you met, or one of the stories from your site. We just have to remember who we're doing this for each and every time, because I think when we get too far away from our beginnings, who happens, an FCT cop, and that arrogance happens.
Yeah.
And they don't give a flying, fig about what's going on. And I think we just have to remember who we're doing this for. And I think that's the key thing.
The mission's the same.
Yeah.
Help people quit smoking.
All our mission is the same.
Just kind of jump on those 2 points. Very eloquently said. And I'm going to go away, and thanks to Maria, I'm going to print some We Vape, We Vote stickers for the election coming up. And you mentioned, not forgetting who to do this for. And I'll be honest, like the last 2 weeks since the announcement that disposal was going to be banned, it was not a great place to be. Knowing what we know, I think the numbers were 20% of disposable vape users are going to go back to smoking. Knowing that 2/3 will die prematurely, and knowing that, and being so frustrated with the government not seeing that bigger picture. But there's a lot of elections happening this year. There's a lot of opportunities. And for the first time in my country, both of the main parties are not supportive of vaping, really. The Labour Party are looking at prescription-only model, and the Conservative Party are obviously bringing in these bans. And we've got to make sure they know that. Make sure they know that vapers aren't just going to take this line down, and this is the issue they want to vote on. 4.5 million people is quite a strong number. And I remember doing some polling of vapers in regards to the referendum. And 65% of vapers said that they voted to leave the EU because they didn't like the EU's position on vaping. And the average for the country was 52%. So it was a good amount more. And when you have 4.5 million vapers, it's 600, 700,000 people. The vote was only won on 1.4, 1.5 million votes. So I always like to say maybe, the EU's intransigence and frustrations they cause vapers maybe caused us to leave the EU. So we are a very powerful group, and we've got to try and make sure they know that and stick together and vote on those grounds. Who we're going to vote for, I don't know. I'm currently looking at the parties. I'm going to be speaking to every party I can, trying to understand what their policies are. But yeah, as soon as one party says to me, we support the rights of vapers, I'll be telling the 4.5 million vapers in the UK, don't vote for the traditional parties, vote for that party, because they're the only ones that actually care about you.
Nice.
Good one.
If you have to summarize pretty much what each one of us or what you want in your country to happen, for example, when it comes to vaping in Costa Rica, I would like to be some sort of regulation that is different from tobacco smoking than from nicotine or harm reduction products, right? That's what I want. But I know that in my country it's already regulated and different to Mexico, for example, right? So that's what I'm looking for. What are you looking for?
Right now it's very difficult to say what we want. We would like just at first that be legal, available to anyone. But what I think is very important is that the people know the truth about the damage, about the harm. Because right now our government is saying false information like we found some ingredients that are insecticide, ¿cómo se dice? Insecticide for cockroaches in the e-liquid. So that is very bad because the people think that that's true. And then if we cannot normalize the perception that this is a harm reduction product, it doesn't matter how they regulate, nobody's going to use them because they will think that it's the same as smoking. So what we are trying to do with the associations is to give information so we can normalize the thinking that vaping is less harmful than smoking. Then we will see, because, and you know why? Because the truth is that in Mexico, you can buy whatever you want, wherever you want. So when I talk about harm reduction in Mexico, I use a lot the term of law enforcement, because we Latin people don't think of in law enforcement as the English or American people. When they think of law enforcement, they know they have to comply with the law. But in Latin America, when we think about law enforcement, we think, hey, how can I do it without getting caught? So it's a very different perception. Why is that? Because, for example, in Mexico, they can say, as Tomás said 2 hours ago that they already prohibited the sale of one piece of cigarette standalone instead of the pack. And you can see people selling one-piece cigarettes in every corner in all the Mexico City. And even the policemen go and buy one piece of cigarette. You know what I mean? The policemen don't say nothing, and it's as normal for them to see them that they already buy them. So that kind of law enforcement makes a reality of the country that it doesn't matter if they forbid it. The thing is that the people should know that it's a best option instead of using combustible tobacco.
And when it comes to Canada, for example, thinking about what he just said, Canada is way ahead. For example, they already have the Ministry of Health or Health Canada saying that it's basically safer than smoking to use these harm reduction products. And they already have they're a little closer to consumers, right?
A little, but yeah. I mean, compared to Mexico,
Yeah, for sure.
we're
What is
having
next?
sex
What
with
is
Health
next?
Canada compared to Mexico. Let's be honest, we're in a love relationship.
Yeah. So
Sorry,
what
no
is
one found that
next?
funny, but I did.
That was
First,
funny, though.
did you? First of all, my dream would be for Health Canada to define is it 5.3, guys? 5.1.
Yeah.
I want them to define 5.3 clearly, and they say that just because people own a vape shop, they don't fall under 5.3. Because in Canada, that's what happens. Because once they define it, I can file my human rights, I'm taking a page out of you, file my human rights violations against all those organizations that kick me out of their conferences because they say they have to file thing. That's just a selfish thing. What I really want to happen is I want more robust conversations. I want Health Canada, I want the Minister of Finance to really look back at this tax, my Prime Minister, and say we have to remove it. I want provinces to actually have conversations with the people that they are regulating back to smoking. I want what are they called? NGOs? Non-government official groups. I want them to engage with people who smoke, and I want them to engage with people who vape. I want them to have fruitful conversations. I want them to drop their ego and not think they know best for me, and they know best for anyone who smokes or vapes. For example, I'm just going to share this one little thing that happened in December. I was trying to find statistics to talk about vaping and that kind of stuff. Is that me? Is that me? That's so weird. I wanted to find statistics, and there's this gentleman named David Hammond in Canada, and he just thinks he is the bee's knees. And that's a little old saying how he thinks he's wonderful and he can do no wrong, but he's kind of messed up here and there, had this random sabbatical from the university, went away for a while to correct a mistake. But his department collects data, and they're a great source of information. And I noticed that they kept using the term smoker, smoker, smoker over and over and over again. And I couldn't find what I was looking for, so I left a message and I said, I can't find this. Here's my email address. Send me an email back. And by the way, why are you using the term smoker? I'm just so tired. Is that the marginalizing language that you wanted to use? Blah, blah, blah. So anyways, she emails me back, Jessica. Lovely girl. I appreciate that she engaged with me because most of them don't. And she emailed me back and she said that the data you're looking for isn't available. Just keep looking at the sites. And then she explained to me why they use the word smoker in their transition. And then she told me what to do. This is the part that bothered me. She said, maybe you need to take your own advice and not use the word vapor because that has a negative and marginalizing connotation to it. So a stigma. And I flipped her an email back and I said, that's funny because you're the only person that it has that to. So let me explain something to you. I am proud that I quit smoking through vaping. And if you think it's stigmatizing, maybe you need to stop perpetuating that systemic belief that someone who smokes can never be a good person and that vaping is bad. So I think you guys have a lot more work to do, but please don't tell me what I should call myself as someone who uses vaping products and is smoke-free. Look forward to your new data. That bothered me because we're carrying over. And so that's what I want to stop. Because if we can have these open conversations with the people at the FCT thingamabobby, maybe one or two of them will get it. Jessica never emails me back.
Why?
But I keep talking about Jessica all the time, so I'm thinking she'll hear this eventually. But that's the thing, is we have to stand up. Don't tell me what stigmatizing language is about me. You would never tell a person, I know that someone gets mad at me on this, but as a white woman, I will never tell a person of color what they should or should not consider words to use about themselves. None of my business. I will take their lead, not the other way around. I don't have the privilege to do that, and I know that. And the people that are trying to help us, cure us from our vaping problem, should not feel the privilege to tell us how to feel, how to act, or what to do when it comes to our health.
What about South Africa? What do you want?
Mine's pretty simple. Empathy. You know, in South Africa, we don't have cessation support at all. We don't have it. We tax the people that smoke. We ostracize them. We stigmatize them. In terms of Article 14 of the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, the only thing that we've effectively done is approve nicotine replacement therapies. They're not falling under the essential medicines list. There's no smoking cessation clinics or counseling. There's no real education from a medical standpoint. The nursing fraternity and doctors don't get that level of training. So although I started a movement, Vaping Saved My Life, the reality is I don't care how you quit smoking. All that I care about is that you try quit smoking and have as much support as available as possible to help you in that journey. You know, let's try, and what I don't understand is what I hear some medical professionals say is that, okay, we'll try nicotine replacement therapy, then we're going to try these pharmaceuticals, then we try that. When everything else fails, then we're going to try vaping. It doesn't make sense to me. Why don't we try and find the shortest route possible? So I think right at the very basic of it is just general empathy. Open up those doors, have those conversations, much the same way as we did with HIV and AIDS in South Africa. We turned the tide when we started talking to the people that were affected by this. And once we do that, then suddenly everything falls into place, as that starts with empathy.
I agree.
Yeah, you're completely right. What about you, Mark? What do you want from the UK?
Well, I don't think I can follow Maria and Kurt on their incredibly passionate voices. So I'm just going to come back a little bit to the subject of misinformation. And in the UK, if we could change that, that would be enormous. We know that the public's understanding and confidence in vaccine programs is huge in the outcomes of whether people get the vaccine and whether they end up dying of diseases. In the UK, the confidence in the COVID vaccine is very high, up to sort of above 90%. In regards to vaping, though, you're looking at 54% of smokers not knowing whether vaping is safer or thinking it's as dangerous or more dangerous. And that's killing people. There was a study done for every 1% of smokers knowing that vaping is safer, there's a reduction in smoking of 0.33%. So if that number that we've got for smokers was down to the same levels as, they have the same confidence in vaping as they have in things like the COVID vaccine, we would cut 1.5 million vapors, 1.5 million smokers very quickly. So that's vitally important. And it's not just smokers that matter. It's really important the public know. 24% of the British public know the truth that vaping is safer than smoking. And that's a problem because when people make quit attempts through vaping, they can very easily be told by family members or friends, what are you doing? You know, and so it discourages them. And it's really important that other vapers and vape shops reinforce, reinform, and provide the evidence base so they can push back on that. I find it remarkable, you know, when I smoked, people didn't tell me at the pub, you know, that's going to kill you, you know. Other than what you learn in school and maybe what your parents said, you know, people let you get on with your life. But I've lost count of the times I've put some snus in or nicotine pouch or vaped and someone's made some offhand comment. And that's a shame because their ignorance is leading to more smoking and more death.
Yeah.
And I believe we have, time is up. So, you know, and the thing with the harm reduction is that we know that it's based on love, based on empathy, like you were saying, based on understanding, based on non-judgmental critics of people, like Maria was saying, and based on that we're supposed to encourage the participation of consumers so they can express themselves about the situation and how they're going to be regulated. So I think that at the end, harm reduction, which is like a caring movement for people, and obviously it's based on human rights, I think that we should be continue to encourage our regulators to proceed through that route and encourage our consumers to get involved as well. So I will thank you very much for participating in this panel, guys. You are awesome. You're truly inspirational. And continue with TPA.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were awesome, Jeffrey. Oh, my hair.